Welcome to the OverAnalyzers. I'm Dan. He's Mike. Do you find fear motivating? We put out a survey on our YouTube to figure out what you guys thought of that question. It's kind of we probably could have been a little bit more specific, but it's a fascinating question. Is fear a good motivator? Do you find fear interesting? Here are the results. Out of the 4 multiple choice questions, do you find fear motivating? Number 1, very much. Number 2, I just deal with it. It doesn't help. Number 3, no, it's very demotivating. And number 4, I'm not afraid of anything, which if you answered yes to that, you're a psychopath. The results are number 1, very much, 21%. Number 2, I just deal with it. It doesn't help, 36%. Number 3, no, it's very demotivating, 37%. And I'm not afraid of anything, 6%. So the majority of people said that fear is not motivating and it doesn't help at all, which was very surprising to me.
Well, yeah, I have 2 observations. One, 6% of people said they aren't afraid of anything. Therefore, 6% of these people are sociopaths. And I think that it's supposed to be 1 in 20, right? That are sociopathic. So that's almost exactly, I think so. So I think that's almost exactly right on with normal populations. So cool.
Well, that's terrifying.
Yeah. Well, we could get into sociopaths in a later episode, but it shouldn't be. Just because you don't feel things doesn't mean you're a bad person.
Right. But that's what we want to talk about today is fear a good motivator? Are you motivated by fear? And what is fear? And this cool theory called TwoFactor theory of emotion. Explain.
Yes. Okay. Well, first off, it's Halloween this week, which is what prompted us to talk about fear, which we had a bit of a hard time with at first. We were both thinking, fear. I mean, what do we really say about that? Fear is kind of a bad thing. Or whatever. You could debate whether it's good or bad, and we are about to. But once we started to dig into it more, it actually gets pretty interesting. So despite being a little bit reluctant, I'm actually pretty excited about this idea of fear. All right. The 2-factor theory of emotion. This is one of the areas that the prompt of let's talk about fear led us into.
And I don't think this is very popular.
I've never heard it before.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the 60s, there were these 2 scientists, Schachter and Singer, and they had this theory that emotions really had 2 components to them. There was the physiological part of it, the idea that certain things happen in your body, like in some cases your heart beats faster, your pupils dilate, you get your body produces adrenaline, you get these physiological things happening, and that's part of the equation. And then the other part is you looking at your environment and interpreting those things. So you might get this physiological response, but then you look around you and think, the guy with the gun, he's going to kill me. I'm very afraid. And that's how you interpret it or not. And there's different interpretations. And that's what makes this experiment interesting, is that they tried to test this. So this experiment is a little bit, not convoluted, but it's a little complex. So I'll try to get it across as simply as I can. They took a group of people, and they split them into 4 different categories. In every case, they lied to them, which, just as a side note, if anyone ever wants to do some kind of behavioral experiment on you, they are going to lie to you. That seems to be a common theme in every experiment we ever read about. They took these people, put them into 4 groups, and they told all of them that they were going to inject them with a drug that was supposed to improve their eyesight. And they were going to test whether or not this actually did improve their eyesight. Total BS. That is not what they were doing. So they had a placebo group where they injected them with saline or something. And they just said, oh, okay, you got the eyesight drug, carry on to the rest of the experiment. So that was the one group, placebo. And then for the other 3 groups, they injected them all with adrenaline. Which to me seems a little bit ethically questionable, that you could tell someone they're getting this innocent improve your eyesight drug and then inject them with adrenaline. But they did. and I guess that's fine, at least in the 60s. They inject them with adrenaline, and then they told them three different things. So in one group, they described the symptoms that they were going to experience from this eyesight drug, but they described the symptoms that these people actually would experience. Of you're going to feel really alert, you might feel a little bit shaky, you're going to, have all these symptoms of getting injected with adrenaline. And they called that the adrenaline aware group. They still liked them about the drug, but they told them what was really going to happen. Then they had the adrenaline misinformed group, where they gave them the injection, and then they told them they were going to have a bunch of unrelated symptoms. Oh, your head's going to hurt, your feet are going to itch, and all this stuff that was not actually going to happen. So these people got adrenaline, but they were told completely wrong symptoms. So the symptoms that they actually did experience, like the heightened awareness and the shakiness, that was going to be unexpected. And then there was the adrenaline ignorant group, where they injected them, and I don't actually know if they told them that they wouldn't experience symptoms, or they just didn't tell them anything about the symptoms they would experience. So they didn't misdirect them, they just didn't tell them anything. Okay. So what they did after setting up all four of these groups is they put them in a room with this person who was, part of the research team. And this person acted, they were, I don't know, doing questions or some kind of fake made up thing for the study. And this person, in one case, acted euphoric, like they were just really animated and happy and in some kind of state of euphoria. And then they also did this experiment where the person acted angry. And what they were looking for was, do these groups of people that we secretly injected or not injected with adrenaline, do they mirror the emotions of this test administrator? Are they going to act euphoric if the guy's acting euphoric? Are they going to act angry if this guy's acting angry? Follow all that?
Yes.
Again, it's a little bit of there's a lot of different groups going on. But the takeaway is that they injected people with adrenaline and also had a control group. They told them some different things, and they looked to see how their emotions would mirror that of somebody else experiencing anger and euphoria. Okay. What would you have expected to happen there? Because what they got was a little bit surprising to me.
Well, I don't know what I would have expected before I read the paper, but I think that you hear a lot about like the power of suggestion and everything. So you would probably assume that they felt how they were told they were going to feel, right?
Yeah, and that is also what I would have thought. I would have thought that the group that you injected with adrenaline and then you told them you're going to feel really excited, you're going to be shaky, you would think that they would be the most amped up. They're expecting the symptoms that they're actually getting. That is exactly the opposite of what actually happened. So I don't remember the exact ranking in these different experiments, but I think it was with the euphoria one, the people that experienced the most euphoria were the ones who were injected with adrenaline and then either not told about it or misdirected. They in both cases, they had adrenaline in their body that was put there by these lying scientists, and they did not expect it. They were either expecting nothing or something different. And those people experienced the most amount of euphoria, or essentially mirrored the person in the test room. And that was the same result for when they had the anger experiment. When there was a person angry, they mirrored that anger. The placebo group had less of an experience than they did, which I would totally expect. You would think the group that did not actually get injected with adrenaline, they're obviously not going to experience euphoria and anger to the same degree that the groups who did get injected with adrenaline. But the really interesting part is that the group that got injected with adrenaline and were told about it, I don't think they were actually told they got adrenaline, but they were told to expect these certain symptoms, they were the least affected by this experiment. They were the calmest, the least euphoric, even above the placebo group. Even the group that did not get an injection of adrenaline, they were the lowest key group out of all of them, which is to me a very surprising result. Right.
Yeah.
So the I keep wanting to say Schecter, like the guitar brand, Um, Schachter and Singer, they concluded that this supports their two-factor theory of emotion, which essentially says that there is the physiological component, which in all but the placebo group, that was controlled for. They all got ejected with the same amount of adrenaline. But then there's the interpretation part, where you see your environment, you analyze things, and decide what those physiological experiences are actually causing you. In a sense, you're almost deciding what emotion those get channeled into. And like in this experiment, you can, based on what you tell a person, can influence tremendously the emotion that they actually feel, even if the physiological symptoms are the same.
I give my friend Forrest metaphor. Okay, tell him. I think this is sort of what we're saying, or what's going on in your brain. But
Yeah, simplify it a little bit for us.
I will try. Uh, Imagine you and a friend are walking through a forest. Maybe the sun's going down, it's getting a little dark or whatever. You hear this huge crash right next to you. You didn't see anything, so you look over to your friend and he says, "Oh my God, it's a bear, we have to run." And so you run away. Scenario number one. Number two, you're walking with your friend. You hear the crash. You look over to your friend. He says, "Oh my God, a tree just fell on a kid. We have to go save him." So you run into the forest and save the kid. Scenario number three, you hear the crash. You look to your friend and he says, "Oh, it's totally fine. I just threw a rock. It's no big deal." Right? The friend is your brain, and that crash is the person talking in the experiment, or the stimulus, or whatever it is that you're trying to encode. And then a part of your brain tells you how to feel about the situation, right?
Yes.
So all of the different subjects were told different things, and that affected how they translated what was actually happening. It
Yeah.
wasn't like they all experienced this same concrete thing all through each four groups.
Yeah. In your scenario, the crash, the sound, it prompts a response in your body and in your brain. And
Right.
then you look at your environment, you try to decide, how do I interpret this? And the way you interpret it, even though it's the same crash in every case, the way you interpret it is what determines the emotional response that you get.
Right.
And there's one more experiment that I think is really interesting along these lines, that is probably even more similar to what you're describing. I think this was in the 70s. I can't remember the names of the scientists, but they were trying to test this theory of, or this phenomenon of misattribution of arousal. So this is the silliest experiment. I mean, it's interesting, but it's just funny. It's like something that frat guys would think of. So they took two groups of men, and men is kind of important in this case. And they had one group walk across a bridge. And the bridge was, as they described it, a non-scary bridge. Just like a normal, safe,
Everyday bridge.
yeah, just like a fine bridge. Okay. And they walked across this bridge. And when they got across it, they were intercepted by a attractive member of the research team, a female. And this attractive female gave them some prompt. I think it was an image or something. And they basically asked them to, I think they wrote out a story of their experience of crossing this normal, not scary.
It was
bridge.
literally a Rorschach. Rorschach. That one.
Yeah.
It was one of those tests. Rorschach
Yeah.
test.
Right. So they created these stories, and then this attractive female study member gave them her phone number and said, "Oh, if you have any more questions or you want to follow up, you can call me at home." And then they took the second group and they had them cross a scary bridge, some kind of suspension bridge high up in the air, just scientifically categorized as scary. And then the same thing happened. They were prompted with this Rorschach test, I think. had to write some story, and then the woman, oh, you can call me at home. And they analyzed the stories that both of these groups wrote at the end of their experience, and they analyzed them for sexual content or romantic content. And I don't know what the exact metrics are on that, but they somehow have some way of deciding to what degree these men made up these sexual stories. And then they looked at how many of the men called this woman at home. And what they found, not too surprisingly, is that the men who crossed the scary bridge were more likely to call the woman, and they were more likely to have romantic content in their stories versus the group that didn't. And their interpretation of this result was that because these men were physiologically aroused, they were afraid to some degree, and they got those physiological symptoms of, elevated heart rate and, adrenaline released in their body and so on. If they were in that state, they were more likely to misinterpret this woman's talking to them as some kind of romantic interest. Versus the ones, who weren't, they were not, or less likely to make this mistake. And sorry for them, it was a mistake. She wasn't interested in them. But that, I think, is a pretty interesting concept too, especially when you also think about the two-factor theory of emotion, in that you can misattribute what is physically happening in your body. You could interpret it as fear, or you actually could interpret it as something else. Like, these men actually thought that they had romantic interest. So, do you think, well, let's get into a broader question for a second here. Do you think that fear is important for people? Do you need it? And maybe that's not even the right question of, saying fear is important. Or put differently, what is your answer to our YouTube survey?
I find fear motivating.
Yeah.
The short answer is absolutely yes. But the extended answer is no. A scary situation can be extremely motivating. If you become filled with fear about that scary situation, it can, completely overcome you, and you get crushed by it, and you can become paralyzed and not do anything. That's obviously not motivating at all. But a scary situation can also cause you, it's like a fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
You either flee from it and get crushed by it, or you get very motivated to accomplish whatever it is.
Here's how I've started to think about fear. Forget the science for a second. From a very primitive level, fear is motivation. I mean, that's the point of it, right? If you see a bear in the woods, that fear response is supposed to get you to run. I mean, you aren't filled with apathy and acceptance. You're filled with adrenaline and, the vision changes, and like, that is supposed to get you to run. That's the reason why we evolved fear as a response. The people who weren't afraid of the bear died. They got eaten. So in that sense, it is motivation. But in another sense, it's avoidance. If there's something that you're afraid of, it's like an emotional force field around that thing. You don't want to get near the bear. You want to be away from the bear. So it's giving you motivation, and it's motivating you to get the hell away from the bear. So in terms of it, like, those two things work at cross purposes sometimes in terms of motivating you. If there's something that you need to do, but you're afraid of doing it because of the consequences of, I finished this project, then maybe people won't like it, or whatever it is that is causing you fear, the fear does those things. It has that physiological response of making you more alert and, in that sense, motivated, but it can also motivate you away from a thing. If you're trying to do something that you're afraid of, you get this problem. of, physiological arousal, but also this desire for avoidance. And I think that is the major contributor to something you see when you're procrastinating, where you have this thing that you need to do and you're afraid of doing it. And so you suddenly become extremely motivated to do other stuff. You want to avoid the thing you're doing, so you go organize your sock drawer or clean out the basement or do something that normally would require a lot of motivation, and you're getting it from fear, but you're doing the wrong thing.
Well, first off, I think, but I'm ready for you to attack me on this, but I think fear is absolutely necessary, or at least fearful circumstances or threats, right?
Okay. Threats are necessary.
Scary circumstances, I think, are necessary to a healthy life. Okay, so here's why. The number one goal for every living thing is to survive, right? Is to simply exist. Every plant, every tree, blade of grass, person, animal, insect, the number one goal of all of these things is to exist and to not die. First for the individual, and then for the family or the tribe, and then the species, and then if you zoom out even further, for the entire collective of living organisms everywhere. So everything alive right now is the way that it is because of that number one goal. Like a tortoise, right? A tortoise doesn't exist to eat grass. It eats grass to exist. Everything we do.
That's deep, but okay.
I don't know why I chose a tortoise, but we develop all these different skills, and we evolve into different things to deal with the threats that come along to our existence. Everything. The interesting thing is that it's all in a pursuit to get to a sense of safety, right? To reach homeostasis where you don't have to fight anymore, where you're not threatened anymore, and you can feel safe. And that's where things get weird, because all throughout time, that has never ever been the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've never been safe. Humans have always been threatened by predators and just by time, by all different factors, environmental factors, whatever. We are always living under a threat, under a sense of fear.
Mm-hmm.
Something's always coming after us. So we've developed all of these ways to fight that. But now, in modern times, you get a bigger sense of safety than we've ever gotten before, right?
Yeah.
So you can sit in your room, not be attacked by predators. You can get food delivered on time if you're rich enough. You don't really have to do anything. But the weird thing is that the more safe and secure and non-threatening your environment is, strangely, the more unsatisfied you become. Like if you look at super rich, spoiled people, they're miserable, which is so weird and never makes sense. But my theory as to why, I think, is because you are built to fight the threats against you. Always. Like everything about you is built to go against that sense of fear or that threat. Like that's how we got here. But if you take away all of the fears and the threats, then nothing about you has a purpose, right? Because all these things that you evolved to fight with no longer have any use. You're like this bag of useless tools because there's nothing to do. Are you following along? Does this make sense?
Yes. I don't know if I agree, but I am following.
Okay. Well, what do you not agree about?
Well, okay, getting back to the two-factor theory a little bit. Fear, emotion, it's not really this singular, there's not a fear chemical that exists in your body and you need it, right? It's really an interpretation of what is happening. And I think that you are very right in that if you get into a state where everything is comfortable and you aren't struggling against anything, oftentimes you wind up with apathy or aimlessness. I think we all understand that, and you certainly see that a lot in people who are uh, very motivated by money, and they make a lot of money, and then the motivation is gone, and then they're not very happy. uh, you need motivation. You need that drive to do something, and scary things are a pretty good way to get it. If you think about adrenaline junkies, right? People who do terrifying, dangerous things that for most of us, I mean, if somebody tried to strap me into a wingsuit and have me fly down the face of a mountain, I would fight for my life because that's probably going to kill me. I'm not doing that. But some people seek that out, even though they know that the mortality rate is astronomically high and that they will almost certainly die doing that if they do it for long enough. People seek it out. They want that adrenaline and that fear. And in many cases, those people have a lot of issues outside of that, where they're depressed or they're struggling with a lot. And that is kind of solving a problem in that they aren't getting that adrenaline and emotional response from the rest of their life. Anyway, that's a whole different thing. But I definitely agree that you need motivation. You need to be physiologically aroused and excited in one way or another. But I don't think fear is what you need. You don't need to be threatened.
I mean, challenged. It doesn't have to be fear. I don't mean we should all live in fear constantly or be scared constantly. That's not what I mean. But
Right.
I think we are built to overcome challenges. They could be simple, very simple challenges, but we are meant to fight that stuff or solve problems.
Yes. Here's the angle I want to take here, the thing that I'm trying to get at. I do agree. I think you need the motivation part of fear. Or anything. Like, there needs to be some source of that, right? If you are just bathed in apathy all day long every day, I don't think that's a healthy place to be. And I've never encountered someone who was very successful along any metric who was utterly apathetic and didn't care about anything. So I definitely agree with that. But the fear part of it, I think it's important to. There are many people who are paralyzed by fear, right?
Right.
It's a pretty common state where the avoidance part of fear is a major problem, or they're getting too much physiological response. You're stage fright, for example. There's a sweet spot for the nervousness that you feel going on stage. You don't want to be lethargic and unfocused, not getting any kind of physiological arousal if you're going to try to perform on stage. That's not good. But if you get too much, you become uncontrollably shaky and panicky, and you can't focus. And it's the Yerkes-Dodson law. We talked about this before. The arousal is like a U shape, where you want to be in the sweet spot in the middle. So some people are too far on one side, where they're getting physiological arousal. It might be too much, and they're interpreting it as fear, and they're avoiding things. And that is a problem for me, and I think for many people. Whereas there's the other side of it, where you aren't motivated. Nothing is causing you to get that arousal, where you're excited and wanting to do something. So it's a multi-dimensional spectrum, in that you want the right amount of arousal. And I know that's an awkward word to be using constantly, but that's what they use in the science literature. So we'll kind of stick with it. But you need the right amount of arousal. Too little is bad, too much is bad. You want to be in the right spot. And then you want to, adhering to the two-factor theory of emotion, you want that arousal to be channeled in the right directions, where it gets you to do things that you want to do, and it doesn't get channeled into the fear response of, I need to avoid this thing and run away. Does that follow?
Yeah. This is what, and I think I'm trying to say the same thing, but I've done my best work when it's really high pressure.
Yeah.
I've also done my worst work in really high pressure. Like when I first started out and I was given a really important task, quick deadline, high pressure, whatever. There was a couple times when I first started out where it just crushed me, like it destroyed me because I couldn't sleep at night. I didn't know how to pace myself. I didn't know how to tackle the problem. And I would freak out about it so much. I couldn't I couldn't deal with it. And it just like it turned out awful. Absolutely terrible. But then there's other times where I'm given a very high pressure task and I do exceedingly well because it's like this huge jolt of electricity. Like every part of me turns on to accomplish this task. I'm like, thinking in lightning speed. I'm completely focused. Um, it's just like I feel alive. Like that is, So it. I think you're muted.
Sorry. In that case, you're in the sweet spot of the curve. You're like right
Yes.
at the peak of arousal. Sorry, but not too much to where you become out of control or you can't manage things.
Right. I totally agree. And that's what I mean. You don't need to be constantly terrified or anything like
Right.
that. But I'm saying that aspect of it, like that challenge, um, is very important because I have also had time where I haven't had any deadlines or I haven't had everything's up to me, right?
Mhm.
Especially in creative pursuits. People fall into this trap of like, I have all these things I want to do, but I don't really know what I want to focus on. I'm not really sure. And you're just kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know, you don't know what to focus on. You're not sure what to do until something comes along and paves that way for you and says, you have to do this or else. You
Right.
get something with a deadline. You get something that's a high risk. You get something that every part of you just turns onto, and you must accomplish this thing, or else something bad happens.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of time, like I don't know. For me, it was like a job offer, or you have to get everything together and get this accomplished, or else you lose the job, or any task at work. Like
Right.
if I don't finish this, I fail at my job. I must finish it. And so in that way, I am always able to complete work, at my job because there's always this risk involved. It's this, and it's a machine that works really well. And I
Mhm.
think, or when I'm at home by myself, like it's kind of complicated, but I can get things done, but it's different. It's like I need that outside source. I need that third party risk
Yeah.
that's involved. And that's what like accountability is. It's like something outside of you that I guess it's sort of a sense of fear, but it's like maybe I shouldn't be calling it fear, but it's that challenge, it's that risk, it's
Mhm.
that thing. Like sorry, go ahead.
No, just I was gonna call it stakes. Like the feeling of consequence. Whether
Yeah,
that's I think that labeling everything fear
yeah,
is not the right thing because fear is like the end result of an interpretation. You have
yes,
pressure on you. If you're afraid of it and you're experiencing fear, that's probably not a good thing. You're
I agree. Yeah,
right. And if you are interpret it differently as excitement, or in the case of this experiment, anger or something else, that is a good thing if you're trying to direct yourself in that way. Like it's the same base thing happening, but
right.
choosing how you channel it is something that we can demonstrate in experiments where it actually is possible to channel those things in different directions. And you have some choice in that. Like you can channel it in a certain direction. That is not necessarily fear.
Yes, agreed. Okay, so this is a terrible example, but it's the first thing that came up.
Okay.
In Breaking Bad,
Yeah.
where he starts out as this teacher that's totally safe, boring, vanilla life, where he's never taken any risk, he's never done anything, he like feels miserable,
He
even
works at
though
a
his
car
life,
wash and yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's just like so simple and so, I mean,
Hmm.
it's relatable uh, to a lot of people. But then all of a sudden, this sense of risk or the stakes go up. where he
Right.
gets diagnosed with lung cancer and he has to do something about it. Or he doesn't have to, but finally he's going to. And then,
Hmm.
he feels alive, and even though, things don't go great, but this is the case
Whoa,
with like
spoiler.
every right. This is the case with every hero in every movie
Yeah.
or book. They're only heroic, and we only love them because they take a big risk, or they risk it all. Like, that is the thing that I think we are meant to do. And I don't always mean like really big
Yeah.
life or death risks, or I hardly ever mean that. I- but we're meant to overcome challenges, and a lot of times when we're left up to ourselves, we somehow expect ourselves to come up with challenges, uh, and accomplish them like all on our own. And I don't think, I guess this goes into like motivation and everything. I almost feel like self-generated motivation almost isn't a thing. Uh, it either comes from who you, I don't know. Maybe that's getting too weird, but
I think motivation is a boulder that we want to hopefully chip away at slowly. I there's so much. I mean, motivation is like one of the most fundamental questions in life, right?
right. But I think it is extremely linked to this.
I agree. Okay, this is talking about emotions is emotional because it's
Right.
personal, right? Um, I think, like we saw in the YouTube poll that we did, people, again, I think the poll was kind of flawed, but people are pretty split on yes, it is motivating to me, or no, it is not. And I think that separating it out into two layers is really important. If you are not if you are on the apathetic end of the spectrum, you need the, I mean, this is a little simplistic, but like you need more adrenaline. You need more physiological arousal. You got to be more awake, more inspired to do something. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, but creating pressures and stakes and this feeling of I have to do this by this date or else something bad happens, that can be really critical in getting that motivation. Just as kind of a dumb example, this was me being very clever. 3 months ago, I really wanted to improve my pull-ups, and I cleverly scammed our community into doing it with me and logging all their results on a Google Doc so that it had to be visible. Because I didn't really say this, but I tried this quite a few times of I'm going to do pull-ups every day for months and try to really push myself into new territory. And I failed every single time after like a week or two because there was not enough motivation. And so by cleverly tricking our community into doing it with me, and hopefully it was good for them
It
too.
wasn't a trick. We all signed up
All
willingly,
right,
but yeah.
but my main motivation was to motivate myself by doing that, and holy crap, it worked. We got 1 week left out of the 3 month block, and even though I had periods of really falling off, I didn't fall off, and I got back into it because it felt like stinks. And I wouldn't call it fear. I wasn't afraid, but there is this feeling of if I don't do this, I'm the guy who prompted this and then
Right.
abandoned it, and everyone can see that. It felt like there were stakes.
Right. I think that is so vital to getting things done, and so overlooked. This outside
Yes.
entity that I think it's natural. Like, this is what we evolved to deal with.
Hmm.
So I've been thinking about that a lot lately. And in our Discord, Zach, he's sort of a regular, so we kind of know him. But he posted, he was kind of talking about how he wasn't doing that great, or he wasn't super focused on writing music. So he's a songwriter, and he he said he was, kind of spinning his wheels when he goes to write his songs, and he really wanted to start this YouTube channel and start posting music over there, but he has yet to do that. And he felt like he didn't have any accountability or whatever. So
Yeah.
I guess being the jerk that I am, I was like, all right, Zach, you want accountability. How about the podcast is canceled until you post the link to your first video on your new YouTube account? And he's like, haha, that would totally work. I was like, no, I'm not kidding. Show canceled until you post your link.
I just want to say, I love that you gambled the entire podcast on this without even asking me or anything. You just did that.
Yeah, I was angry because the week before you were so like, all meditative and perfectly peaceful. So I'm like, fine, I'll be the bad guy and just bully everyone.
We can do good cop, bad cop.
But yeah, it was a little risky. But I feel like I knew Zach could do this because the way, he did. But the way he was describing his difficulties, I was like, I know this so well. Like, and the only thing that solves it is some kind of outside force, like giving you some kind of threat or deadline or something. So yeah, a couple days later on Saturday, he uploads his video. He wrote this whole song, recorded all of the parts for it, recorded it, put it together, started a channel, and posted it like, what was it, 3 days later or something? And it's just like, I don't want to give myself too much credit.
I feel like somehow you're taking credit for Zach's efforts here.
That's fine. But I think it demonstrates the point, at least for me, many, many times I've been in a situation like that where that's like the only thing that fixes it is some kind of set accountability or threat sounds so negative, but something to get you to just focus and stop questioning every single problem that comes up, because you'll overanalyze everything that comes along. So I'm going to post a link to Zach's video because it's awesome and you should watch it. But I just thought that was a really cool example. Go ahead.
Yeah, it ended up being really perfect in fitting with the podcast that may or may not have happened this week.
Right.
Turns out it all worked out.
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, just let me know next time you gamble the whole thing on something.
Right.
Okay, one other line of thinking here. Like we saw in our poll, people are a little split and people's experiences are pretty different. And some people are, I think, paralyzed by fear. It's a major problem where they feel the arousal, but they also feel the avoidance part. It's just the word. We just have to get comfortable saying that word. I'm sorry. There's no other word for
it. There's also all different levels of fear we're talking about here.
Right. Okay, here's an example from my experience. In college, when I did my music performance degree, I played classical guitar. And one of the things you have to do a lot is perform in front of people. Sometimes it's strangers, sometimes it's your professors, sometimes it's judges who decide if you graduate or not. And worst of all, your peers, the other people who are in your same program doing the same stuff as you. And classical guitar, it is mostly a solo instrument, and it's a very quiet instrument. So usually what happens is you are on stage with a spotlight on you, playing this extremely difficult instrument, completely solo, sometimes for an hour, in front of this room of professors and judges and your peers. And it's, in my opinion, the scariest. Like, if you couldn't invent a scarier
that's
way.
Terrifying.
Yeah. Often enough, the music is all memorized. You're just pulling it out of your head, and you are constantly terrified of a memory slip or something going wrong to where suddenly you can't perform. And I witnessed this happen many times, and there is nothing more uncomfortable in the world than being the person or even watching a person who's trying to perform this concert and suddenly they forget what they're supposed to play. And then there's just these moments of silence that last for eternities. Point is, it's freaking scary, okay? And obviously getting through a music degree, especially performance degree, is very difficult, and there's a lot of work that has to be done. But one of the most difficult things is overcoming the paralyzing fear that shows up when you have to go perform on stage. And I have no idea what the numbers are, but I am certain that many people don't even attempt it because of how scary that is. Like they don't even try to do this degree that they may have wanted to do otherwise. But the dropout rate of people, at least from my experience, is very high. There were so many people who just could not cope with that. And I had a very hard time with that at first, but I kind of figured it out for me. And I'm happy to say that after looking into some of the science here, I think my method was right. And what I realized was that fighting with the fear and the physiological response is utterly the wrong thing to do. And I witnessed this many times. We would be coming up on a concert. Maybe it was a group concert type of thing where, you know, this happened pretty frequently, like once a semester, a couple times a semester, where, you know, the 8 people in some group, you know, I would go out, perform a couple solos, and then somebody else would go out and perform a couple solos. So there might be, you know, a dozen of us that all have to perform on this day or this night, and we're all going to take turns. And what I would see very often was people would go, oh, tomorrow we got our concert. I'm not nervous. I feel great. I feel really good. You know, I'm feeling awesome. I think I'm going to do fantastic. Morning of, like, oh yeah, I'm feeling great. No big deal. An hour before, like, oh yeah, I still feel good. And then right before going out, they go, holy shit, I'm panicking. I think I have to vomit. I can't physically even walk out there. I'm losing it. What the hell am I supposed to do? And they actually go out in a state of utter panic. And that I witnessed many, many times. And I think that the solution to that is to not deny anything, to go, we have a concert in a day and I am nervous about it. I've been thinking about it a lot. I am worried. And then the day of, you know, I feel kind of jittery and my hands are shaking a bit. And there's this avenue of acceptance where you say, I know for a fact that when I get out there, I am going to experience these things. My hands are going to shake. I'm going to get that kind of gross, clammy sweatiness. My vision is going to be narrowed. My sense of time is going to be somewhat distorted, where I think things are happening faster than they really are, which has a tendency to make you play too fast. My breathing is going to want to accelerate. My heart rate is going to go up.
You're trying to get rid of the ambiguity of it.
You're trying to be the group in the 2-factor theory of emotion test that were injected with adrenaline, and technically they didn't know they were injected with adrenaline, but they were told that you are going to experience these things. You want to be that group of people where you know that going out to perform or going to a job interview is going to produce these things in your body. And what you want is to accept those things and say, this is going to happen. It's very silly to deny that your hands are going to shake when you get out there, especially if that's been the thing that's happened every previous time you've attempted this. What you want is to understand those things and view them as a physiological response. You know, I'm in a stressful situation and my body is going to respond this way. And the interpretation part, it's almost like you want to accept it to whatever level you can. And you want to know exactly where it's coming from. I'm doing a stressful thing, and so I'm getting this, you know, stress response. But interpreting that as fear or even panic, that's what you're trying to avoid doing. You know, you want to understand it. You want to attribute it to the thing that's happening and accept it and say, you know what, I'm even afraid, but I'm not panicked. I know what to expect. I know that I can play if my hands are a little shaky. I know that it's okay that my vision narrows. I know that my sense of time will be distorted and I need to play a little slower than I think because that's, you know, people tend to play too fast and so on. But there's a very important way of viewing the physiological response that happens in those situations. And it worked really well for me. I survived my degree even with almost no experience doing that kind of thing. And I watched many, many people drop out. I even had a good friend who did the entire degree, everything, all the coursework, all of that. And then the final thing that you have to do is your senior recital. And he never did that. And he never got his degree because he was too afraid of doing that 1-hour concert, even after having put in all the work, learned all the music, everything, because of how scary that is. So point with that very long little anecdote is that fear, to use the simple definition, is motivating. It creates this physiological arousal, and that can be really important, but your interpretation of it can also be extremely important. And we have demonstrated through experimentation that just understanding that response, knowing that those things are going to happen, can dramatically lessen your emotional response to it. So if you're somebody who really struggles with fear, acknowledgement, acceptance, understanding, I very strongly believe that that is the way.
I got nothing to add. I really like that.
All right. Thanks everybody. Thanks Zach for coming through and saving the show. It was looking a little dicey there. Great job and great piece of music. We'll link to that for sure. Thanks everybody. You can leave comments here on YouTube. You can hang out with us on Discord. You can email us at the OverAnalyzers podcast at gmail.com. We will be back next week.